Kelly Thomas here, 32 years old, and still amazed at how a single binder changed everything. 3 months ago, I was just another marketing director at Tech Vision Solutions, invisible despite bringing in millions. "You're nothing here, my VP," Richard sneered after our $200 M product launch, taking all the credit. But when the COO held up my policy binder in the board review asking who owned it, I'll never forget Richard's face as I raised my hand. His whispered, "Oh no," was just the beginning of my corporate comeback story. Before I dive in, where are you watching from? Hit that like and subscribe. You'll want to stick around to see how documentation became my ultimate revenge weapon. I never expected that my obsession with documentation would be the thing that saved my career. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began. I joined Tech Vision Solutions 8 years ago as an entry-level marketing coordinator. Fresh out of college with a marketing degree and big dreams, I was determined to climb the corporate ladder. Tech Vision wasn't the tech giant it is today, valued at $1.2 billion, but even then it was making waves with innovative software solutions. My first desk was basically a glorified cubicle in the corner of the marketing department. I remember being so proud of my little nameplate, Kelly Thomas Marketing Coordinator. I had no idea the journey that lay ahead, or the battles I would face. Over the years, I worked relentlessly, putting in 60-hour weeks and sacrificing weekends. I moved up from coordinator to specialist, then to manager, and finally to marketing director. Each promotion came with more responsibility, bigger projects, and increasingly impressive results. By my 6th year, I was directing campaigns that brought in millions in revenue. My teams respected me, and I thought the executive leadership did too. That's when Richard Peterson entered the picture. The company hired him as the new vice president of marketing, bringing him in from a competitor with much fanfare. Richard was in his early 40s, tall, with perfect salt and pepper hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He had an impressive resume and an even more impressive ability to work a room. "Kelly, we're going to do great things together," he told me during our first meeting, his hand on my shoulder just a second too long. "Your track record here is solid. I'm excited to see what you can learn from me." Looking back, I should have caught that red flag. Not what we can learn from each other, but what I could learn from him. Richard saw me not as a colleague, but as a subordinate who could make him look good. My closest ally at Tech Vision was Amanda Harper, another director who headed our digital engagement team. Amanda and I had started within months of each other and had supported each other through every corporate challenge. "Watch yourself with Richard," she warned me after his first week. "I've heard stories from my friend at Stratotech about his management style. He's known for taking credit for his team's work." I brushed off her concerns. "I'm sure he's just trying to establish himself. Besides, my work speaks for itself." Oh, how naive I was. There were others in our corporate ecosystem who would play important roles in what was to come. Jennifer Chen from HR was always sympathetic to employees' concerns, but careful about challenging executives. She operated within the political constraints of her position, always walking that fine line between supporting staff and protecting the company. Document everything, she told me once over coffee, not looking me in the eye, just as general professional advice. Always good to have a paper trail. At the time, I thought she was just giving generic HR wisdom. Later, I'd wonder if she'd been trying to warn me. Then there was Michael Santos, our chief operating officer. Michael was a process person through and through. Where our CEO, Stephanie Walker, was all about vision and big-picture strategy, Michael was about execution and accountability. He carried a leather-bound notebook everywhere and was known for asking the most detailed questions in meetings. "If it's not documented, it didn't happen," was his mantra. I would come to appreciate that philosophy more than he could ever know. Stephanie Walker, our CEO, was brilliant, but somewhat removed from the day-to-day operations. She had founded Tech Vision 12 years ago and had built it into what it was today. I admired her tremendously, but she trusted her executive team implicitly and rarely questioned their representations of what was happening on the ground. As time went on, I began to notice troubling patterns in the company culture. There was an unspoken hierarchy that didn't always align with the organizational chart. Certain people could bypass processes that others were held strictly to. Credit flowed upward, while blame flowed downward. And most concerning for me, there seemed to be an invisible ceiling for women in leadership positions. Despite my track record of successful campaigns and innovations, I kept hitting roadblocks when it came to advancement. My male colleagues with similar or even lesser results were being promoted to senior director or considered for VP tracks. Meanwhile, my performance reviews, while positive, always contained vague feedback about executive presence or needing to be more strategic. One of my personal habits that would prove crucial was my meticulous documentation. I kept detailed records of every project, every meeting, every decision. I created process documents, campaign playbooks, and policy guidelines. When we implemented new marketing automation tools, I documented every workflow. When we revamped our brand guidelines, I created comprehensive documentation for the entire company. "You're almost obsessive about this stuff," Amanda teased me once, watching me update our campaign tracking spreadsheet with color-coded cells. "It helps me think," I replied. "And it covers us when questions come up later." Little did I know how prophetic those words would be. The real test came when TechVision decided to launch Neurotech, an artificial intelligence platform that would potentially revolutionize how our clients handled data analytics. This wasn't just another product. It was a bet the company initiative that would either propel us to the next level or become an expensive failure. Richard called me into his office 18 months before the planned launch date. "Kelly, I'm putting you in charge of the Neurotech marketing strategy," he said, leaning back in his ergonomic chair. "This is a massive opportunity. The executive team will be watching this closely." I was thrilled. This was the chance I'd been waiting for, a high-visibility project that could showcase my abilities to the C-suite. "I won't let you down," I promised. "I know you won't," Richard replied with that same smile that never reached his eyes. "Because I'll be overseeing every aspect of this. This is too important to leave to chance." Over the next several months, I noticed Richard inserting himself into more and more of my meetings with the product team. He began requesting daily updates and positioning himself between me and the executive team. Whenever I was scheduled to present to the C-suite, Richard would step in at the last minute. "No need for both of us to be there," he'd say. "I'll make sure they understand what your team is doing." I started hearing secondhand about Richard's innovative approach to the Neurotech launch. Strategies I had developed were being presented as his brainchildren. Campaigns I had designed were being attributed to Richard's team. When I tried to address this with him directly, he brushed me off. "Kelly, you need to be a team player here. The executives don't need to know every detail of who did what. What matters is that marketing delivers results." By this point, I was starting to see the writing on the wall. Richard was systematically ensuring that all the credit for the Neurotech marketing would flow to him while I did the actual work. But I was in too deep to walk away from the project, and I genuinely believed in what we were building. So I kept working, kept documenting, and kept hoping that somehow the truth would become evident to those who mattered. Little did I know that my meticulous documentation would eventually become my greatest weapon in the corporate battle that was brewing. The 18 months leading up to the Neurotech launch were the most intense of my professional life. I was the first one in the office and the last to leave, often sending emails at 2 a.m. as ideas struck me. My husband started joking that he should send Neurotech a bill for stealing his wife. Every aspect of this launch had to be perfect. Neurotech wasn't just another product, it represented TechVision's future. Our competitors were all racing to market with their own AI platforms, but we had a potential edge with our proprietary machine learning algorithms. My job was to make sure the world understood that difference. I assembled a cross-functional marketing team of our best people. We created an integrated campaign strategy that included everything from technical white papers to an immersive virtual reality demonstration that would let prospects experience data visualization in 3 dimensions. I personally wrote the messaging framework that would ensure consistency across all channels. "This is brilliant work," Kelly Amanda told me after reviewing my campaign deck. "The way you've positioned Neurotech as not just a tool but a strategic partner is exactly right." My days became a blur of creative reviews, budget meetings, vendor negotiations, and endless revisions. I developed a comprehensive go-to-market strategy that identified key industry verticals and created tailored messaging for each. I built a detailed timeline with hundreds of deliverables, each assigned and tracked. Throughout it all, Richard hovered. He required approval on decisions I would normally make independently. He insisted on joining calls with our agency partners. He demanded daily status updates that took precious time to prepare. "I need to be able to report to Stephanie and the board," he explained when I questioned the micromanagement. This is too important to leave anything to chance. What I didn't know was that in his updates to the executive team, Richard was gradually rewriting the narrative. In his version, he was the visionary behind our marketing approach. He was the one pushing the team to excellence. He was the one making the critical decisions. Despite the frustrations, I remained focused on the end goal, a successful launch that would establish TechVision as the leader in AI-powered analytics, and my team delivered beyond even my highest expectations. The Neurotech launch was nothing short of spectacular. Our pre-order campaign generated $200 million in commitments within the first week. The tech press was unanimous in their praise. Industry analysts moved TechVision into the leader quadrant in their market reports. Our stock price jumped 15% in a single day. The launch party was held at an upscale hotel in downtown. The entire company was there along with key clients, investors, and media. There was an atmosphere of celebration of triumph. I stood in a corner, exhausted but proud, watching as people explored the demonstration stations my team had set up. Then Richard took the stage, champagne glass in hand. "I want to thank everyone who made this incredible success possible," he began, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "When I first conceived of our Neurotech marketing strategy 18 months ago, I knew we needed to break the mold." I froze glass halfway to my lips as Richard proceeded to describe his vision, his strategy, his execution. It was my work, my team's work, being claimed wholesale, without so much as a nod to our contributions. "Richard really outdid himself on this one," said a board member standing near me, not realizing who I was. "Stephanie was smart to bring him on. That man knows how to build a brand." I felt physically ill. 18 months of work, thousands of hours, countless sacrifices, all erased in a 15-minute speech. I slipped out of the party early, unable to bear any more of the misdirected praise. The next morning, I received a meeting request from Richard. When I arrived at his office, he was leaning back in his chair, looking pleased with himself. "Kelly, I wanted to discuss your role moving forward," he said without preamble. "You did adequate work on Neurotech, but I noticed several areas where your performance fell short of expectations." I was stunned. "Fell short, Richard. The launch exceeded every metric we established. The board is thrilled with the results." "The board is thrilled with the results I delivered," he corrected me, his smile tightening. "Let's be clear about something. I am the vice president of marketing. I am the one who presents to the board. I am the one who sets the strategy. You are a director. You execute. That's the hierarchy here." I felt a surge of anger. I did more than execute. I created the entire marketing framework for Neurotech. I developed the positioning. I wrote the messaging. I designed the campaign architecture. That was my work you presented as your own last night. Richard's expression changed then, his facade of collegiality dropping away. He leaned forward, his voice low and cutting. "Listen carefully, Kelly. You're nothing here. You're a replaceable resource. There are 100 marketers I could hire tomorrow who could do what you do. The difference between us is that I understand how the game is played. I have relationships with the board. I have Stephanie's ear. You're just a worker bee who doesn't know her place." The words hit me like physical blows. I had given everything to this company, to this launch. I had sacrificed time with my family, my health, my peace of mind, and now I was being told I was nothing. "If you want to continue at TechVision," Richard continued, "you'll accept your role and stop trying to get recognition above your station. The Neurotech success is my win. The sooner you accept that, the better for your career." I don't remember leaving his office. The next thing I clearly recall is locking myself in a bathroom stall, struggling to breathe through my tears. 8 years of dedication reduced to nothing in a single conversation. That's where Amanda found me 20 minutes later. "Kelly, are you in here?" Her voice echoed in the tiled room. "Someone said they saw you running this way." I couldn't respond, but my muffled sobs gave me away. Amanda waited patiently outside the stall until I finally emerged, eyes red and makeup ruined. "Oh, honey," she said, pulling me into a hug. "What happened?" Through broken sentences, I told her about the meeting with Richard, about his cruel dismissal of my contributions, about being called nothing. "That absolute bastard," Amanda whispered fiercely. "He can't get away with this." "He already has," I replied, wiping my eyes. "It's his word against mine. He's VP. I'm just a director. Who do you think they'll believe?" So what are you going to do? Amanda asked. I don't know. Maybe it's time to look for another position. I can't work for someone who sees me this way. Don't make any decisions right now, she advised. Take the weekend. Clear your head. We'll figure this out. I spent that weekend in a fog of hurt and confusion. I drafted and deleted a resignation email at least 5 times. I updated my resume. I browsed job listings. But something kept me from pulling the trigger. Sunday evening, I was organizing my home office, trying to distract myself when I came across a box of Neurotech materials. Inside was a copy of the marketing playbook I had created, a comprehensive document detailing every aspect of our strategy, messaging, and execution plans. As I flipped through the pages, something caught my eye. On the cover page was a line I had included almost as an afterthought: Policy Owner Kelly Thomas, Marketing Director. I stared at those words, remembering TechVision's policy ownership system. For any major initiative, there was always a designated policy owner, the person ultimately responsible for the process documentation. It was a bureaucratic detail that most people ignored. But as I sat there, a plan began to form in my mind. I hadn't just done the work on Neurotech, I had documented everything. And throughout that documentation, my name was listed as the policy owner. In that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't resign. I wouldn't make accusations. I would let the documentation speak for itself. It was time to play the long game. Monday morning, I arrived at the office with renewed determination. Instead of confronting Richard directly or filing a formal complaint, I would build my case methodically, using the one thing I knew better than anyone else: our documentation. First, I needed to understand exactly what power the policy owner designation gave me. I spent my lunch hour in the company library, reviewing TechVision's bylaws and operational guidelines. What I discovered gave me hope. According to the corporate governance documents, policy owners had special standing in quarterly and annual reviews. They could be called upon to explain processes, clarify documentation, or provide historical context. More importantly, they had the right to be present when their policies were discussed at the executive level. Armed with this knowledge, I began a comprehensive audit of all the documentation I had created over the past 18 months. The marketing policy binder for Neurotech was just the beginning. I had also created the go-to-market playbook with detailed campaign timelines, the messaging architecture document with positioning statements and competitive analysis, ROI, the budget allocation framework, showing ROI projections, the marketing automation system documentation with workflow diagrams, the crisis communication protocols for potential launch scenarios. On every single one, I was listed as the policy owner. I had created these documents to help the team execute effectively, never imagining they would become my protection. But I knew documentation alone wouldn't be enough. I needed allies who could corroborate my contributions without directly challenging Richard. I began having strategic conversations with mid-level executives from other departments who had worked closely with me on the launch. Dave, do you still have that email where I sent over the messaging framework for the developer community? I asked our developer relations director casually. I'm updating my portfolio of work and want to include that project. Lisa, remember when we created the ROI calculator for the sales team? Would you mind sending me your feedback notes from that process? I'm compiling best practices for future product launches. Each conversation was carefully framed as a professional development exercise rather than evidence gathering. I didn't mention Richard or any concerns about credit. I simply established a paper trail of my contributions. Meanwhile, Richard was growing increasingly confident in his position. The board had praised him effusively for the Neurotech success, and he was now being mentioned as a potential candidate for Chief Marketing Officer when our current CMO retired the following year. In meetings, he became more blatant about dismissing my input. Kelly, that's not the direction we want to go, he would say, when I offered strategic suggestions. Let's stick with the approach that made Neurotech successful. The irony was painful. He began excluding me from executive briefings where I had previously been included. We need to streamline these meetings, he explained when I questioned the change. Too many people in the room dilutes the conversation. I maintained a professional demeanor throughout, never letting on that I was building a case. I continued to do excellent work, document everything, and wait for the right opportunity. That opportunity came in the form of our marketing automation system. Shortly after the Neurotech launch, I had implemented a sophisticated workflow that significantly improved our lead nurturing process. The system increased qualified leads by 40% while reducing the marketing team's manual workload. Richard, who had paid little attention to this project since it wasn't as high profile as Neurotech, suddenly began mentioning his new marketing automation system in executive meetings. I learned this from Amanda, who heard it from her friend in the sales operations team. He's telling everyone he overhauled the lead management process, she told me over lunch. He's presenting it to the executive team next week as part of his quarterly review. This was the opening I had been waiting for. The marketing automation system was entirely my initiative. I had researched the technology, secured the budget, designed the workflows, and trained the team. Most importantly, I had created comprehensive documentation with my name, prominently displayed as the policy owner. I didn't confront Richard. I didn't go to HR. I simply made sure that my documentation was filed correctly in the company's central repository, where the board members could access it during their quarterly review preparation. Then I waited. The tension continued to escalate over the next few weeks. Richard, perhaps sensing that I wasn't as defeated as he had hoped, began to actively marginalize me. He reassigned Amanda to another department, separating me from my closest ally. "It's just a reorganization to better align with our strategic priorities," he explained in an email announcing the change. The subtext was clear: cross me, and there will be consequences. Rumors began circulating that I was difficult and not a team player. In the corporate world, these are often code words used to undermine women who stand their ground. I started noticing sidelong glances in the cafeteria conversations that stopped when I approached. Through it all, I maintained my composure and continued documenting everything. Each slight, each exclusion, each reassignment was noted in my private records with dates, times, and witnesses. The culmination came during my quarterly performance review with Richard. He had prepared a document citing attitude problems and resistance to leadership. "I'm concerned about your performance, Kelly," he said, sliding the paper across the desk. "Multiple team members have expressed concerns about your collaborative skills." "Could you provide specific examples?" I asked, calmly taking notes. It would help me understand where I need to improve. Richard's vague allegations fell apart under specific questioning. Who exactly had complained? What specific instances demonstrated my poor attitude? How did these alleged issues square with my team's excellent results? "This isn't a courtroom, Kelly," he finally snapped. "The point is that perception matters, and the perception is that you're not embracing the team culture I'm trying to build." After the review, I requested a meeting with Jennifer from HR. I didn't make accusations or demand action. I simply expressed confusion about the review process and asked for clarification about how subjective criteria like attitude were evaluated. Jennifer was sympathetic but cautious. "Performance reviews are primarily at the manager's discretion," she explained. "But I can see why you'd want more specific feedback." As I was leaving, she added quietly, "The quarterly board review is coming up in 3 weeks. Sometimes these things have a way of working themselves out." I took her hint. The board review would be my opportunity, but I needed to be perfectly prepared. I spent evenings organizing my evidence, creating a simple but comprehensive presentation that I could deliver if called upon. I practiced responses to potential questions, making sure I could present facts without sounding bitter or accusatory. The final provocation came just days before the board review. I discovered that Richard had attempted to update several policy documents, changing the owner from my name to his. Fortunately, TechVision's document management system kept a record of all changes, and Jennifer from HR quietly reversed the modifications, citing administrative error. The stage was set for the confrontation that would either redeem my career or end it. I was terrified but resolute. After months of careful preparation, documentation would finally have its day. As the quarterly board review approached, the atmosphere in the marketing department became increasingly strained. Richard's behavior toward me grew more openly hostile as he continued his campaign to isolate and discredit me. One Tuesday morning, I arrived to find my team gathered around Bryce, a junior marketing manager who had always been particularly loyal to Richard. "The VP wants daily status reports from all project leads starting immediately," Bryce announced, not quite meeting my eyes. "They should be submitted directly to me by 5 p.m. This was a clear attempt to circumvent my authority. As marketing director, all project leads reported to me, and I provided consolidated updates to leadership. This new structure effectively removed me from the information flow. That's an interesting change to our reporting structure, I said calmly. Could you forward me the communication from Richard explaining the rationale? I want to make sure I'm clear on the objectives. Bryce shifted uncomfortably. It was a verbal directive, for efficiency. I see. Well, I'll check with Richard directly then. In the meantime, let's maintain our current process until we have formal documentation of the change. I smiled pleasantly, but the message was clear. I wasn't going to be sidelined without a fight. Later that day, I found my access to the executive dashboard had been revoked. When I contacted IT, they informed me that Richard had requested the change, claiming my role no longer required that level of visibility. Instead of creating a scene, I simply documented the incident in my growing file, date time, and the exact wording of IT's explanation. Then I found a workaround by asking Amanda to share relevant reports with me for input on her projects. The next blow came when Richard excluded me from the pre-review strategy meeting where the marketing department's presentation for the board was finalized. This was a meeting I had not only attended but often led in previous quarters. It's a streamlined session this time, Richard's assistant explained, when I inquired about the missing invitation. Just Richard and the senior analysts. I later learned that Richard had spent most of the meeting presenting my marketing automation system as his own innovation, practicing the presentation he planned to give to the board. He had even gone so far as to use screenshots from my documentation with my name carefully cropped out. He's getting sloppy, Amanda whispered to me in the break room. He actually referred to the project as Kelly's system before catching himself. He's so convinced of his own importance that he's not being careful anymore. That was valuable information. Overconfidence often leads to mistakes, and Richard was becoming too comfortable in his deception. The final straw came when Richard scheduled a hostile performance review just 1 week before the board meeting. Unlike our previous review, this one was attended by a junior HR representative who seemed thoroughly intimidated by Richard. Kelly, your performance continues to deteriorate. Richard began reading from a document he didn't bother to share with me. You've been uncooperative with the new reporting structure. You've gone around proper channels to access information, and your negative attitude is affecting team morale. I remained calm, taking detailed notes. Could you provide specific examples of how my attitude has affected morale? Perhaps team feedback or metrics showing declining performance. Richard's jaw tightened. This isn't a debate, Kelly. This is a formal warning. If your performance doesn't improve immediately, we'll need to discuss your future at TechVision. The threat was unmistakable. Richard was laying groundwork to terminate me if his other tactics didn't force me out first. After the meeting, I requested a private conversation with Jennifer in HR. I didn't go to her office where we might be observed, but suggested a coffee at a cafe 2 blocks from TechVision. I'm concerned about some patterns I'm observing, I said carefully once we were seated with our drinks. I've documented several instances where information access and reporting structures have been changed without clear business justification. Jennifer listened attentively as I outlined the situation without explicit accusations. I showed her my documentation, not everything, but enough to establish a pattern. This island. Concerning, she admitted, reviewing my notes. But Richard is a VP. Any formal investigation would require significant evidence and executive approval. I'm not asking for an investigation, I clarified. I just wanted to make sure there's awareness of the situation in case it becomes relevant. Jennifer studied me for a moment, then said quietly, The quarterly board review is this Friday. Michael will be reviewing all departmental documentation, including policy ownership. It might be worth ensuring your materials are properly filed in the central repository. It was as close to explicit advice as she could give without compromising her position. I thanked her and spent that evening organizing every piece of documentation I had created, ensuring each was properly tagged with my name as policy owner and uploaded to the official system. As the week progressed, Richard became increasingly confident. He was openly discussing his plans for reorganizing the marketing department once the board approves my recommendations. The implication was clear: my role would be diminished if not eliminated entirely. My anxiety grew as the board review approached. I had done everything I could to prepare, but Richard had direct access to the executives in a way I didn't. What if they never looked at the documentation? What if Richard had already convinced them of his version of events? The night before the review, I barely slept. I rehearsed what I would say if given the opportunity to speak. I reminded myself that I had facts on my side, even if Richard had relationships and rank. Morning came, and with it the knowledge that by the end of the day my professional future would be decided one way or another. I dressed carefully in my most professional outfit, a navy blue suit that I reserved for important presentations. I wanted to look confident and composed, regardless of what happened. As I drove to the office, I reminded myself that I had done nothing wrong. I had created extraordinary work, documented it meticulously, and maintained my integrity throughout Richard's campaign against me. Whatever the outcome, I could hold my head high. The board review was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the executive conference room. Until then, it would be business as usual, or as usual as things could be under the circumstances. I focused on my work finalizing a campaign report and responding to emails with forced normalcy. At 1:30, I saw Richard walking toward the conference room carrying a leather portfolio and looking supremely confident. He nodded to me with a slight smirk as he passed my desk. "Wish me luck," he said, his tone, making it clear that luck had nothing to do with his expectations. I smiled tightly and returned to my computer screen, heart pounding. Now all I could do was wait and see if my preparation would pay off, or if Richard's power play would succeed. The next hour was the longest of my professional life. I stared at my computer screen, unable to focus on anything. My career, my reputation, and my future at TechVision hung in the balance, and I was powerless to influence what was happening behind those closed doors. Then at exactly 2:45 my phone rang. It was Michael's assistant. "Kelly, your presence is requested in the executive conference room immediately." The moment of truth had arrived. I walked into the executive conference room with my heart pounding so loudly, I was certain everyone could hear it. Around the massive mahogany table sat TechVision's leadership CEO Stephanie Walker, at the head flanked by Michael Santos, our COO, and various board members and executives. Richard sat midway down the table looking surprised and irritated by my entrance. "Kelly, thank you for joining us," Michael said, gesturing to an empty chair directly across from Richard. "Please have a seat." I sat down, folded my hands on the table to hide their slight trembling, and waited. I could feel Richard's eyes boring into me, but I kept my gaze on Michael, who seemed to be leading this portion of the meeting. "We've been reviewing the quarterly performance across departments," Michael explained, his tone neutral. "Richard has just given us an impressive overview of marketing's contributions, particularly the Neurotech launch success and the new marketing automation system." Richard smiled smugly at the mention of his achievements. I maintained my professional expression, waiting for Michael to continue. "One of my focuses this quarter has been process accountability." Michael continued, reaching for a binder on the table in front of him. "As you know, I believe strongly that clear ownership drives results." He held up a familiar binder, the marketing policy binder I had created for Neurotech. My stomach tightened as I recognized it. "This comprehensive documentation has been instrumental to marketing's success," Michael said, opening to the cover page. "Which brings me to my question." He looked directly at Richard. "According to our records, you presented the marketing automation system as your initiative, correct?" Richard nodded confidently. "Yes, I oversaw its development and implementation as part of our post-launch strategy." Michael nodded thoughtfully, then held up the binder so everyone could see the cover page. "I'm curious then, who is the listed policy owner on this documentation?" Richard's smile faltered just slightly. "Well, as vice president, I'm ultimately responsible for all marketing initiatives. The policy owner designation is just an administrative detail for whoever compiles the paperwork." Nevertheless, Michael persisted, "Who is the listed policy owner?" There was a pause, as Richard realized he didn't actually know whose name was on the document. He had been so busy taking credit that he hadn't bothered to check this crucial detail. "I believe that would be one of my team members," he said vaguely. "As I said, it's an administrative designation." Michael looked around the room. "The policy owner listed on this document, and on all the Neurotech marketing documentation, in fact, is Kelly Thomas, Marketing Director. So my question is, who is Kelly Thomas?" There was a moment of complete silence in the room. Richard's confident expression froze as the implications dawned on him. Slowly, deliberately, I raised my hand. "That would be me," I said clearly, my voice steadier than I expected. Richard's face drained of color as he whispered almost involuntarily, Oh no. Michael's expression revealed nothing as he turned to me. Kelly, as the documented policy owner for these marketing initiatives, perhaps you could share your perspective on their development and implementation. This was the moment I had prepared for. I took a deep breath and began speaking calmly and professionally. Certainly. 18 months ago, I was tasked with developing the marketing strategy for Neurotech. I led a cross-functional team that created and executed the integrated campaign that resulted in the $200 million in pre-orders at launch. I outlined my role in the project without directly contradicting Richard's earlier claims. I simply stated facts referencing specific documents and dates, all of which were recorded in the materials before the board. As for the marketing automation system, I continued, I identified the opportunity to streamline our lead nurturing process after analyzing our conversion data. I researched platform options, secured budget approval, designed the workflow architecture, and implemented the system with my team. The documentation Michael is holding contains the complete process maps and performance metrics. The room was silent as I finished. Several board members were looking back and forth between Richard and me with dawning comprehension. Stephanie was frowning slightly, her gaze fixed on Richard. This is quite different from the narrative we've been hearing, one of the board members said finally. Richard, would you care to explain the discrepancy? Richard attempted to recover. Kelly was certainly involved in these projects as one of my team members. She handled some of the tactical execution under my strategic direction. Perhaps in her enthusiasm, she's overstating her contributions. Michael cut in before I could respond. I find that unlikely given the documentation. Every substantive document related to these initiatives lists Kelly as the owner and creator. The email trails support her account. And interestingly, there were recent attempts to change the ownership designations on several of these documents, attempts that were flagged by our system as unauthorized. Richard's face flushed. As VP, I have every right to update documentation as needed for clarity. Actually, Michael replied, our governance policies specifically prohibit changing authorship designations without proper process. But that's a separate issue. He turned to me again. Kelly, could you explain more about the marketing automation system? I'm particularly interested in the workflow design that improved lead qualification rates. This was where my preparation paid off. I pulled out my tablet and asked permission to display the workflow diagrams on the conference room screen. For the next 10 minutes, I walked the board through the sophisticated system I had designed, explaining the logic behind each decision point and how it had improved conversion rates while reducing manual processing time. It was clear from the executives' engagement that they were impressed not just by the system itself, but by my deep understanding of it. Richard, by contrast, looked increasingly uncomfortable as it became obvious he couldn't have designed this system himself. This is remarkable work, Stephanie said when I finished. It was the first time she had spoken during this exchange. Why haven't we heard more about your contributions before, Kelly? The question hung in the air. I could have used this opening to directly accuse Richard of taking credit for my work, of threatening me, of systematically undermining me. But that would have made me appear vindictive, rather than professional. Instead, I said simply, I've always believed that results speak for themselves. My focus has been on delivering those results for TechVision, rather than seeking recognition. My restraint had the desired effect. Several board members nodded approvingly, while Richard looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. Well, the results certainly speak volumes, Michael said. As does the documentation. He closed the binder decisively. I think we have clarity now on the ownership of these initiatives. Richard made one last desperate attempt. Kelly has been a valuable team member, but I want to be clear that all marketing activities ultimately fall under my authority as vice president. The strategic direction— Stephanie interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. I think we've heard enough. Kelly's documentation and presentation speak for themselves. She turned to me. Kelly, thank you for this clarification. Would you mind giving us a few minutes to continue our discussion? I nodded, gathered my materials, and walked out of the conference room, with my head held high. As the door closed behind me, I caught a glimpse of Richard's face, a mixture of anger, shock, and the dawning realization that his deception had finally caught up with him. I returned to my desk, hands shaking with adrenaline. I had done it. I had presented the facts calmly and professionally, letting the documentation speak for itself. Now I just had to wait to see what the executives would decide. The waiting was excruciating. 45 minutes passed before my phone rang again. Kelly said, Michael's assistant, "Could you please come to Stephanie's office? She and Michael would like to speak with you." As I walked to the executive floor, I prepared myself for any outcome. I had stood up for myself and my work. Whatever happened next, I had reclaimed my professional dignity. Stephanie and Michael were waiting for me in her spacious corner office. Their expressions gave nothing away as they invited me to sit. Stephanie began, "First, I want to apologize to you. It's clear that your contributions to TechVision have not been properly recognized, and as CEO, that ultimately falls on me." I hadn't expected an apology. Before I could respond, she continued, "We've made some decisions that will take effect immediately. We'd like to promote you to Senior Director of Marketing Strategy, reporting directly to Michael rather than to Richard." I blinked in surprise. "Thank you. That's unexpected." "It shouldn't be, Michael," said frankly. "Your work merits recognition. The documentation you created didn't just prove your contributions. It demonstrated a level of strategic thinking and operational excellence that we need more of at TechVision." "What about Richard?" I asked, unable to help myself. Stephanie and Michael exchanged glances. "Richard will be transitioning to a role as Regional Marketing Manager," Stephanie said carefully. "He'll maintain his employment with TechVision, but will no longer have department-wide authority." In corporate terms, this was a significant demotion, from vice president to a regional manager role. Richard would lose his executive status, his seat at the leadership table, and most of his authority. "We believe this structure better aligns with the actual contributions and capabilities we've observed," Michael added. I nodded, still processing the sudden reversal of fortune. After months of being marginalized and belittled, I was being elevated while Richard was being demoted. "We'll announce the changes tomorrow morning," Stephanie said. "Is there anything you need from us to ensure a smooth transition?" "Just clarity for the team," I replied. "They've been caught in the middle of this situation, and I want to make sure they understand that the reorganization isn't about personalities, but about optimizing our structure for success." Both executives nodded approvingly at my response. "That's exactly the kind of leadership thinking we need," Michael said. "Congratulations, Kelly. This promotion is well-deserved and long overdue." As I left Stephanie's office, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, vindication, relief, anxiety about the new responsibilities, and a lingering hurt from the months of mistreatment. But mostly, I felt a quiet pride. I had stood my ground, maintained my professionalism, and let my work speak for itself. The documentation that Richard had dismissed as mere paperwork had become the irrefutable evidence that changed everything. In the end, it wasn't about who could talk the loudest or claim the most credit. It was about who had actually done the work and could prove it. As I walked back to my desk, I passed Richard's office. Through the glass wall, I could see him on the phone, gesturing angrily. Our eyes met briefly, and for a moment I saw the full extent of his fury and humiliation. Then I continued walking head high toward my future. The morning after the board review, Stephanie called an all-hands meeting for the marketing department. The large conference room was packed with tension and speculation filling the air. Everyone knew something significant had happened, but details hadn't yet leaked. I sat in the front row, feeling the curious glances of my colleagues. Richard was notably absent. At precisely 9 a.m., Stephanie entered with Michael, both looking solemn but determined. "Good morning, everyone," Stephanie began. "I've called this meeting to announce some organizational changes effective immediately." The room grew even quieter as people sensed the seriousness of the situation. Kelly Thomas is being promoted to Senior Director of Marketing Strategy, reporting directly to Michael. In this expanded role, she will oversee all strategic marketing initiatives and lead the integration of marketing automation across the company. Murmurs rippled through the room as people turned to look at me. I maintained a composed expression, neither triumphant nor surprised. Additionally, Stephanie continued, "Richard Peterson will be transitioning to a new role as Regional Marketing Manager for the Western Territory, focusing on local implementation of our broader strategies." The murmurs turned to gasps. Everyone understood what this meant. Richard had been demoted significantly. In the corporate hierarchy, going from VP to Regional Manager was a dramatic step down. "These changes reflect our commitment to recognizing and rewarding the actual contributions of our team members," Michael added. Kelly has been the driving force behind many of our most successful initiatives, including the Neurotech launch and our new marketing automation system. Her promotion acknowledges that leadership. After the meeting, colleagues approached me with a mixture of congratulations and barely concealed curiosity. No one directly asked what had happened with Richard, but the question hung in the air. "I'm looking forward to working with all of you in this new capacity," I told them simply. "My door is always open." Amanda was the first to give me a genuine hug. "I knew you'd find a way," she whispered. "No one deserves this more than you." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of transition. I moved into a larger office on the executive floor, began attending leadership meetings, and started rebuilding a department that had been fractured by Richard's management style. Richard, meanwhile, made it clear he wasn't going to accept his demotion gracefully. He refused to vacate his VP office until HR intervened. He sent emails questioning my decisions to the entire team. He tried to schedule competing meetings when I called department gatherings. "Ignore him," Michael advised when I brought up these issues. "He's digging his own grave deeper. Document everything, but don't engage, unless absolutely necessary." I took his advice, focusing instead on rebuilding trust within the team. Many had been caught in Richard's web of favoritism and feared retaliation now that power had shifted. I made it a priority to meet individually with each team member, listening to their concerns and ideas without judgment. "I want to create a culture where everyone's contributions are recognized," I told them. "No more taking credit for others' work. No more favoritism. We succeed or fail as a team." For Richard's closest allies like Bryce, I made a special effort to demonstrate that I wouldn't hold past loyalties against them. I assigned him an important project and publicly praised his work when he delivered excellent results. Gradually, his wariness turned to cautious respect. About 3 weeks into my new role, Stephanie invited me to a private lunch off campus. "I owe you a more personal apology," she said once we were seated. "I should have seen what was happening sooner." "You had an entire company to run," I replied. Richard was very skilled at managing up while manipulating down. She nodded thoughtfully. "Still, as a woman who fought my way to this position, I should have been more attuned to the dynamics. The signs were there if I'd been paying attention." "What made you finally see it?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Michael," she admitted. "He came to me before the board review with concerns about discrepancies he was finding in the documentation. He's always been meticulous about process, but even he was shocked by how systematically your contributions had been obscured." We talked at length about the challenges of building a more transparent culture. By the time lunch ended, I felt I had gained not just a boss, but a potential mentor in Stephanie. Back at the office, I faced my biggest challenge, yet restructuring the marketing department for better accountability. I created a new organizational chart that eliminated unnecessary hierarchical layers and established clear ownership for key initiatives. "Every project will have a documented lead who presents their team's work directly to leadership," I explained in the department meeting. "Credit goes to those who do the work, not just those with the highest titles." I could see the relief on many faces as I outlined the new structure. For too long, talented individuals had seen their hard work claimed by others. My new system would make that much more difficult. Richard continued his attempts to undermine me, though they grew increasingly desperate. He tried to schedule meetings with key clients without informing me, only to have them mention it to me directly. He sent emails questioning my strategic decisions to the board, who forwarded them to me with notes of support for my approach. 2 months into my new role, Richard made his fatal error. He attempted to take a major client presentation I had prepared and deliver it himself, claiming there had been a scheduling conflict. The client, confused by the last-minute change, called me directly to confirm. When I brought this to Michael with documentation of Richard's deception, his patience finally ran out. "This has gone beyond professional disagreement into active sabotage," he said grimly. "I'll handle it." The next day, Richard was called to a meeting with Michael, Stephanie, and Jennifer from HR. I wasn't present, but Amanda's friend in Stephanie's office told me it was intense and brief. Richard emerged looking shell-shocked. An hour later, the company-wide email arrived. "Richard Peterson is no longer with TechVision, effective immediately. We thank him for his service and wish him well in his future endeavors." The standard corporate language for a termination. Richard cleared out his office that afternoon, escorted by security, as is protocol for executive departures. He didn't look at me as he walked past my office with his box of personal items. I felt no triumph in that moment, only relief that the constant undermining would finally end. The damage Richard had done, to me, to the team, to the company culture, would take time to repair, but now we could begin that process without his toxic presence. In the weeks that followed, I focused on implementing the transparent attribution policies I had envisioned. Every project document now included a clear list of contributors and their specific roles. Team members at all levels were invited to present their work directly to leadership. Performance reviews included peer feedback to prevent managers from taking credit for their report's achievements. A particular point of pride came when I promoted Amanda to marketing director, filling the role I had vacated. She had been overlooked for advancement under Richard despite her exceptional work. "You deserve this," I told her sincerely during the announcement. "Your strategic thinking and leadership have been invaluable to this department." 3 months after Richard's departure, I was invited to lead a company-wide meeting on our marketing strategy for the coming year. Standing at the podium in the main auditorium, looking out at hundreds of colleagues from across the organization, I felt a moment of profound gratitude. At TechVision, our success comes from our collective intelligence and creativity, I began. Today, I want to recognize the team that has made our marketing efforts so successful. One by one, I called out team members who had contributed to key initiatives, inviting several to join me on stage to explain their innovations. The pride on their faces as they received public recognition was deeply satisfying. After the presentation, Michael pulled me aside. "That's the kind of leadership we need," he said approvingly, lifting others up rather than standing on their shoulders. "I learned from experience what not to do," I replied with a small smile. As I walked back to my office, I reflected on the journey of the past year. From being called nothing to leading a thriving department. From having my work stolen to creating a system where everyone's contributions were recognized. It had been painful, but the outcome was worth it. On my desk was an unexpected envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from Richard, postmarked from another state. I almost threw it away unread, but curiosity won out. "Kelly," it began, "I've had time to reflect on my behavior at TechVision. While I still believe I made valuable contributions, I acknowledge that I failed to properly recognize your work and treated you unfairly. The way I managed the department did not bring out the best in our people or our work. I am sorry for the hurt I caused. Richard." It wasn't a complete admission of wrongdoing, but, from someone with Richard's ego, it was remarkable nonetheless. I filed the note away without responding. Some bridges cannot and should not be rebuilt. Instead, I turned my attention to the future, to building a marketing department where talent was recognized, contributions were valued, and documentation served not as a weapon, but as a tool for clarity and fairness. The binder that had changed everything sat on my bookshelf, a reminder that sometimes the quietest form of power is simply keeping a record of the truth. 6 months after Richard's departure, TechVision had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The marketing department, once characterized by secrecy and competition, had become a model of collaboration and innovation. But the most significant transformation had been within me. Looking back at who I was before that fateful confrontation in Richard's office, I hardly recognized myself. I had been competent but cautious, hardworking but hesitant to claim my achievements. Being called nothing had broken something in me, but in that breaking, something stronger had been forged. The journey hadn't been easy. For weeks after my promotion, I struggled with imposter syndrome, questioning whether I truly deserved my new position, despite all evidence to the contrary. I woke from dreams where Richard was laughing at me in the boardroom, where my documentation vanished when I tried to present it, where my voice disappeared when I tried to speak. "It's normal," Amanda reassured me, over coffee one morning when I confessed these insecurities. "You spent months being gaslit and undermined. That doesn't just disappear overnight." She was right, of course. Healing from workplace trauma takes time, just like recovering from any other injury. I had to consciously remind myself that I wasn't nothing. I was capable, valuable, and deserving of my success. Gradually, the nightmares faded. The constant knot of anxiety in my stomach loosened. I began to feel comfortable in my executive role, bringing my authentic perspective to leadership meetings without second-guessing myself. My leadership philosophy crystallized around 3 core principles: documentation, transparency, and credit sharing. Every project at TechVision now had clear ownership records, visible processes, and recognize contributions from all team members involved. Documentation isn't about bureaucracy, I explained to a group of new hires during their orientation. It's about clarity and fairness. When we document our work, we create a record of truth that speaks for itself. With Jennifer's support from HR, I established a women's leadership initiative at TechVision. We created mentorship programs, skill-building workshops, and networking opportunities specifically designed to help women navigate the often unspoken rules of corporate advancement. "What happened to you isn't uncommon," Jennifer told me as we planned the initiative's launch, "but your response to it was exceptional. You fought back strategically and professionally. That's what we want to teach others." The initiative quickly became one of the most popular programs at TechVision, with participants from every department. Even Stephanie began attending regularly, sharing her own experiences and challenges as a female CEO in the tech industry. "I wish I'd had something like this 20 years ago," she confided to me after one session. "So many of us had to figure it out alone, often the hard way." My personal healing came not just from professional success, but from reconnecting with parts of myself I had neglected during those intense months of conflict. I reclaimed my weekends, started hiking again, spent more time with my husband and friends. I remembered that I was more than my job title or achievements. I was a whole person with interests, relationships, and a life beyond TechVision's walls. One unexpected development came 6 months after Richard's departure. I received an email from a former colleague who had moved to another company. "Thought you should know," Richard interviewed for our VP of Marketing position last week. He didn't get it. Apparently, the reference check from TechVision raised some red flags about his management style and taking credit for others' work. I felt no pleasure at his continued difficulties, only a sense of justice that his actions had natural consequences. The corporate world can be surprisingly small, and reputations follow us from company to company. The most challenging test of my growth came when I received another message from Richard, this time via email. "Kelly, I'm reaching out again because I've been doing serious reflection on my behavior at TechVision. I'm working with an executive coach to address my leadership issues. If you're willing, I'd appreciate the opportunity to apologize to you properly, either by phone or in person. I understand if you prefer not to engage. Richard." I sat with the email for several days, uncertain how to respond. The old Kelly might have ignored it, or sent a coldly professional acknowledgement, but I realized that truly healing meant not carrying anger forward, even while maintaining appropriate boundaries. My response was brief but genuine. "Richard, I appreciate your message and your efforts toward personal growth. I prefer to keep our interaction professional rather than meeting, but I do accept your apology and wish you well in your development as a leader. Kelly." Letting go of resentment was its own form of freedom. I didn't need to forgive Richard for his sake, but for my own peace of mind. The energy I had been using to maintain my anger could now be directed toward more constructive purposes. TechVision ended the fiscal year with record-breaking results across all departments. Marketing, in particular, had exceeded every target, with employee satisfaction scores showing the most dramatic improvement in the company's history. At the final board meeting of the year, I presented our department's achievements with quiet confidence. The same executives who had once seen me only through Richard's distorted lens now nodded with respect and engaged thoughtfully with my strategies for the coming year. After the presentation, Stephanie took the unusual step of making a personal comment. "I want to acknowledge Kelly's exceptional leadership over the past year," she said to the assembled board members. "Beyond the impressive metrics, she has fundamentally changed our company culture for the better. Her emphasis on transparency and proper attribution has spread beyond marketing to influence how we operate across the organization." As appreciative murmurs filled the room, I thought about how far I had come from that moment of despair in Richard's office. The journey had been painful, but necessary, not just for my career, but for my growth as a person and a leader. Documentation had been my sword and shield in the battle with Richard, but in the aftermath, it became something more valuable, a foundation for building a culture of truth and accountability. The binder's reports and process documents that once served as evidence now served as guideposts for how we worked together. That evening, I stayed late in my office, reflecting on everything that had happened. On my desk was a framed quote I had installed after my promotion: "Your work speaks volumes, but only if you give it a voice." This ultimately was the lesson I had learned and now taught to others. In the corporate world, excellent work alone is not enough. You must document it, stand behind it, and ensure it is properly attributed. Not out of ego or ambition, but because clarity and truth are the foundations of a healthy organization. Documentation isn't just about covering yourself, it's about owning your story. In the corporate world, your work speaks volumes, but only if you give it a voice. I learned that being nothing was never my fate. It was just someone else's failed attempt to write my story. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself professionally? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more corporate survival stories. And don't forget to share this with anyone who might be facing similar challenges in their workplace. Thank you for listening to my journey from nothing to something I'm truly proud of. Remember, your worth isn't determined by anyone else's assessment. It's proven by your work, your integrity, and your resilience.